and the US Grand Prix is underway. Max Verstappen's going to give himself an opportunity into turn number 1, but Lando Norris is jumping across. There's the late lunge that Max Verstappen was looking for, but he sends Lando Norris wide, and through goes the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc. First and second battling each other, and they open the door for the driver in the Scarlet car. He roars through, up 3 places to take the lead of this one, past his teammate, past the top 2 in the battle for the World Championship. Verstappen is in second, Sainz is in third, and Norris, our pole sitter, is down to P4. Lando Norris has a penalty for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. He is 3.3 seconds ahead of Verstappen. It will not be enough. It was all about Max with the sprint. Lando took the pole. Lando's got a penalty. Carlos was the lead Ferrari on the grid. But Sunday is all about Charles. Another masterclass from Ferrari's favourite son. Charles Leclerc wins the US Grand Prix.
And that's my boy, another win.
Let's go. Mega, ciao. Mega.
Hello and welcome to the Undercut Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jesse Billington, and we are back to review the 19th race of the Formula One 2024 season, the United States Grand Prix. And to do this, I'm joined by just Thiemo Albus Daly this evening. How are you?
Refreshed, I think, in a surprising way, considering how the weekend started with Austin and how it ended. It was not a great advertisement for any part of everyone aside from the Grand Prix itself, like in terms of what are we watching here aside from not a lot of much of anything happening. And then you get to the Grand Prix and it suddenly the wick gets turned up to 11, and not a classic race, not a classic Austin, but probably more than we were expecting, and it kind of very much fit in with the fabric of this season of we really don't know what to expect. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Again, sort of coming out of this weekend, sort of obviously back after a fair old break of Formula One. And it was an exciting one to come back to and to sort of restart the sort of final sort of section of the season, the final 6 races. And was a fairly good entry to this year's calendar. It's going to be a tricky one sort of picking out favourite races because this had a fair amount to it. And a Ferrari 1-2. Can't get happier than that. Anyway, we'll jump into the little bit of news that we ought to cover quickly, and the main bit is the FIA has brought out some changes to Formula One. As usual, this always comes out after we've recorded our preview to the Grand Prix, and this is that the fastest lap, which is usually awarded at each Grand Prix, will be removed for 2025 and 2026. Teams will also be required to field a young driver twice per season during free practice, essentially upping the stakes on this one. You've got to do twice for 2 different drivers now, isn't it, or something? So they've changed the ruling.
That is my reading of it.
Yeah. And also the 3 pre-season test days will be introduced for the 2026 season, allowing the new power units that are being introduced just sort of give people a chance to bed them in and get used to them a bit more. So some sensible changes coming in. And when you look at the sort of shenanigans that teams often pull when it comes to the fastest lap, and again, we saw that this weekend, I think it's a fairly straightforward and wise sort of thing to be taking away that fastest lap.
I disagree with that one because I like that it adds that extra spice to a race, especially when you get some of the more dull ones. I mean, look at Singapore, for example. It added we don't know the implications of that fully yet, but if, for argument's sake, it comes down to a point, how fun is that you get to have a little bit of extra stuff to try and deal with that you can't deal with, and you've got to do better in other races, or you've just got to make sure you finish as high as possible, and you can't afford to take it easy. You've got to be pushing to the limit all the time. So I'm not sure what the point in getting rid of the fastest lap is. It adds a little extra spice to the Grand Prix. Removing it adds nothing to the Grand Prix. It takes an element away that makes it potentially more exciting. And we saw it in Austin this weekend. Ocon got it at the end and was trying to take it away from Colapinto, all drivers for Williams, because of their battle in the Constructors' Championship and how valuable points are for those midfield and back-end teams. It seems weird to take away another opportunity for them to score when potentially they don't have that many opportunities as it is, because a lot of the time their cars are very track dependent as they try and build up their teams over the season and over the years to try and claw their way to the front, and we see how difficult that is. So to take away an opportunity for them to advance or to maybe get a little bit further ahead in the standing. It seems a bit of a backward step. But I'm all up for the young drivers and the preseason tests. That bit makes sense. So 2 out of 3.
Yeah, I join you on the preseason testing and the free practice driving. I think the fastest lap thing, especially, is I like the pettiness that it sort of instills, especially if it's sort of a team outside of the top 10 that sort of goes, well, if I can't have it, no one can. And that's often, it's interesting. It plays out interestingly across the season. I'm curious as to what the reasoning was behind taking it away. That's the bit that's
I
really
think
got me.
that's one of the things we didn't really get an explanation as for why it was just we're doing this.
Yeah. So I'm sure there is some sort of reason behind it, but I'm
You
sort of
hope so, but it's also the FIA.
yeah, it could just be sort of done for the sheer hell of it. But we'll wait and see how it sort of plays out towards the end of this season. Obviously, the last chance for people to accrue fastest laps potentially means that 2 of the points that were raised as we get into this, great for one driver who's now scored their first ever fastest lap, and terrible for a guy who's now got a new record for most race entries without a fastest lap. But we'll get into that in due course. The other important news is, of course, more driver announcements of the all-female Formula E test. Tatiana Calderon and Carrie Schreiner driving for Maserati, and Marta Garcia and Gabriela Jelkova driving for Porsche. So some interesting names there, familiar ones, certainly 3 of the 4. Gabriela Jelkova, do you know where she's from? What she's up to at the moment, Timo?
She's been around for a while. She's done some endurance racing. She's done some of the Indian Racing League last year, if memory serves, and potentially the year before. So she's been around for a while. I think she's done a little bit of single season stuff a while ago, but she's kind of been in the background is a name I was familiar with, and kind of good to see that she's back because again, so many people out there, you kind of keep a track of everyone all the time, and then you go, where's this person? Or someone pops back and you go, oh, there you are. Good. I was absent-mindedly wondering about you, so I'm glad that she's still around somewhere. Same with Tatiana. I'm glad to see that she's back. Makes sense to see Carrie there as well, as she needs to go somewhere after F1 Academy this year because of the age limit and the 2 seasons being up. And Marta at Porsche was a little surprised because I thought she was with recently rebranded ERT for this test, but I think Porsche might be a better option for her, so that's fine. And if my sources are correct, we should have a couple more driver announcements for that by the time we do our Mexico preview. So news should be coming thick and fast. We might actually benefit for a change in terms of news not coming out just after we record.
Yeah,
Although I probably shouldn't have said that.
Well, it's the fun thing with a triple header is it means sort of if we miss something on one, about 3 days later, we're going to be talking again anyway. So we've at least got that flow to sort of cover things off. We might as well then jump into the Grand Prix. And I have to say, overall, it is quite exciting watching the grid closing up as much as it is late on this season. We're reaching the end of a series of regulations. The cars are all convergently evolving. And each weekend, it's a knife edge as to who's got the right package and the edge over the field. Next year will be a distillation of that further. And we could be in for a proper bonzer of a season. Less 2021 and more 2012, I feel, which is jolly exciting. Also, first race in 10 races to finally have a safety car, which I think is the longest gap since a period in 2003. Thiemo, you might remember the gap of races from 2003, which had it, but
I was looking for this earlier to see, and the data was not anywhere near enough well correlated for me to get a determining answer on that one.
yes, it's been a long time since we've last had a safety car gap of this period, which is interesting to think about because the racing has been very good in that gap since, but we've not needed sort of huge shunts or sort of safety car triggering issues to bring that out.
And even the reason for this one coming out wasn't a big shunt either. It was just a car spinning out and just being on a particular bit of track where it wasn't easy to recover it from under a virtual safety car or a yellow flag or something like this. It was just awkwardly beached.
Yeah.
So it is a very bizarre period to watch the safety car not be utilized as much as we'd expect.
Considering how exciting those races have been too, you'd expect there to have been one, but we haven't had to rely on crashes for that excitement, which is good. I think again, it's that growth of the series, which is what we want. Anyway, the frontage of it all sorted. Might as well dive into sort of recapping what's gone on. We'll go team by team as always, now ordered by championship order, and obviously that means we'll kick off with McLaren. Thiemo.
Yeah, for me, this was very much a case of watching one driver who is obviously a world champion and another who thinks they should be a world champion and seeing the stark contrast and difference between the two of them there. you saw it right from the start. Norris bottled it immediately. He only had eyes on Verstappen. As romantic as that is, he just completely forgot about Ferrari and left that door wide open for them. And it's going to be quite amusing come Abu Dhabi if they are the team that benefit massively in terms of both titles because of Norris just being so blinkered in terms of dealing with Verstappen that he forgets about these prancing horses behind him. The battle between Verstappen and Norris at the end of the Grand Prix showed the difference between them, as I say there, and it made me kind of smirk a good bit because you can see the difference in the drivers, and it just goes back to that whole adage of it's one thing to catch someone, it's another thing to get past them, especially when they're not just a Grand Prix winner, they're not just a world champion, they're a multiple world champion and the defending champion in this case. And proof again that you don't need to have the best car to get a better result or to beat someone in a better car. On the other side of the garage, quiet race for Piastri, doing his bit for the constructor standings and neatly dropping back a little bit at the end to give Norris that P4 instead of making it slip down to P5. It's the sort of thing where he's helping, he's doing his end of the deal, and it doesn't impact him, which is perfect because that's exactly how he would want that to be. So I think Mark Webber's probably also quite happy with that in terms of, yeah, this one's fine. I got no notes for you there, boy.
Yeah, it's an interesting one for McLaren, and I think you're definitely right with the difference between a world champion and someone who thinks they should be a world champion is stark as ever. Overall, it feels like a bit of a drop off for them this weekend. And I think there wasn't the usual sort of sheen to their performance that has been there for the past few races. Certainly, some of their sort of stronger races this year have had a proper sort of luster of professionalism and competence across the board. This one felt like it was just missing a few of those aspects.
Weirdly, Piastri felt like Alonso did in Bahrain in terms of I know I can't do much here, so I'm going to do damage limitation and just drive really wisely and stay out of trouble and not let people pass because he only had what 3 or 4 cars in front of him. But in terms of just staying clean out of all the rest of it, it's a very wise drive from him. I thought, in terms of I know that this isn't my race, so I'm just going to go for a drive.
Yeah, a wise race from Piastri and a consistent one as well. Norris really good, but there is still this cracking under pressure, and you can see that off the start at the Grand Prix, the overtake on Verstappen. There are still these gaps appearing in his racecraft that, again, like you said, highlight the difference between he and Verstappen because you just don't see that from Verstappen. Verstappen's playing a very different game, and Norris just can't compete against it. I think the important thing to discuss, of course, the penalty against Norris, 5-second penalty for overtaking off track, going off track and gaining an advantage. And at the same time, Verstappen was noted for going off track. It was noted as a track limits infringement. And but ultimately, Verstappen hadn't done that at all, really. That Grand Prix wasn't close to getting a black and white flag or a penalty for it. Norris, meanwhile, went off track, overtook, penalty for it, fairly clean cut. The problem was we'd had other drivers gaining penalties for that same corner for different reasons. So it's easy to sort of muddy the waters quickly when you start bringing in other incidents.
What I found quite interesting about that, though, was obviously we don't hear all of the team radio that gets broadcast to the driver. So I don't know if it was this or if it was Verstappen doing what we've seen other drivers do and somehow piecing together what's going on in the rest of the race by catching glimpses from the big screens around the track. But it just smacked of he watched other drivers doing this thing and turned around and went, oh, they're penalising them if you do it this way. So that's what I've got to do here. So I'll just be really crafty about it. It felt like he'd either just been told this in like Morse code or something, or he'd been watching it and pieced it together. I just thought, that's really quite smart. And very frustrating if you're Norris.
Yeah, the thing with Verstappen's racecraft is it is so smart, it's intelligent. I think some of it possibly stems from Red Bull keeping him so well informed as to what's going on. And ultimately, Norris wasn't ahead by the apex at any means. Verstappen had measured out his braking, knew that he could lift, make the corner, and then run the racing line a little bit wide, but still within sort of rough limits to the exit. And it was going to be Max's line to control. It was never going to be Norris's. And yeah, ultimately, you make the overtake off track, you pays the penalty. McLaren should have told him to give the place back sooner, is my theory.
Well, that was the other amusing thing. Norris even saying on the radio, I should have just given it back sooner. Well, why didn't you? You could have
just done that.
You're the one. You don't need the team to tell you. You
You're the
could
one
have
with the
just
steering
let him
wheel.
go, and you still had enough time to catch him. In theory, you had the pace. Christian Horner said that after the Grand Prix. It's like if he'd just done it back, he would have had us, and we would have been done. Nothing we could have done about it. But he didn't, and
Yeah.
that's where there's these chinks in the armor still.
Yeah, it's that sort of that little lack of self-confidence when it comes to it. And I mean, if you look at the other penalties that came for this corner, it was largely for the attacking driver shoveling the defending car wide. Russell Bottas saw the aggressor push Bottas off track, so it was a different penalty. But the whole situation comes down to MotoGP, weirdly enough. The bikes require a wide runoff that's stable for the two-wheeled machines, as gravel tends to flip bikes. MotoGP races at COTA, so you need these sort of big tarmac runoffs. We see the same with Austria as well, because that is also used by MotoGP. And it just sort of necessitates this sort of different layout of circuit, but also when you come to put cars on it, you get those little bits where you can sort of push wide or push someone wide, and you can sort of not gain an advantage, but race them differently. And I think Lando's issue here is that Max was just too clever about it. It's worth also, like you said, noting Piastri backed off, and people bemoaned his win in Hungary or his overtake in Monza, but Norris and Piastri were allowed to race in those instances, and that was the result we got. Now it's coming down to crunch time. Oscar's playing a mature team game. And again, I think this is proving himself as the number two driver, a little bit of that Webber coaching, but also just sort of shaking off any
I'd say
question as to
less of
whether
a
or not.
number two driver, just more of a team player,
Yeah,
and going,
he's
I will fight you when I want to fight you, but I'm not in a position, and it doesn't benefit the team for me to do it here. So I will
yeah.
back off and I will help out here.
He's racing looking at the bigger picture, which is something that I think McLaren sometimes struggles to do, certainly of late. So it's yeah, an interesting overall result for McLaren, and I think it should have gone a different way. I think that there should have been that instruction to let Verstappen back past early on. You can easily do that with relative sort of closeness through that tight, twisty section of the final part of the circuit, still pick up DRS and still be able to tail him into turn one.
Mm.
And still be close enough to do it all over again the next lap. It's not impossible to do it there. But McLaren and Norris just sort of lack the conviction to do it, which is a bit of a shame.
And
Meanwhile,
Christian Horner was saying as well that they at Red Bull were obviously on the opposite end of this back in what 2017 or 2018 with Kimi Räikkönen in at that same section of track a few corners later, where there was no take that Verstappen did on Kimi. It wasn't quite legal in terms of track limits, and had to give it back and had to see and had to deal with the frustration of that. So it's not unheard of, and it's kind of yeah, you will make mistakes from that, but you've got to learn from it. And again, it shows the difference between the drivers, but also shows the teams in terms of McLaren have come a long way in a short amount of time, but they are by nowhere near where they think they are or where they want to be.
hmm. I mean, you mentioned there obviously a quote from Christian Horner. It leads us nicely into Red Bull. And I mean, your note on this one is one that resonates with me quite a bit as well.
Yeah, it doesn't sit right with me though.
Mm,
I'm feeling like I'm becoming a bit of a Max Verstappen fan, and at the end of the race, I felt very much like Nick Frost at the end of Hot Fuzz, watching Simon Pegg take on the whole town when he's still in the police car. He's not joined in yet. He's just watching. You're kind of like, oh, go on, and you kind of weirded out that you're rooting for him because there's this driver that this time last year we were so bored with and hoping would take early retirement because of how dominant he was. But I think this is the first time since 2021 where we've had to see Verstappen really truly fighting for an entire season for a championship. And obviously 21 painted through no fault of his own, but he's not been challenged across an entire season since then. And he's not had to defend a championship lead with a lesser car either. So he's putting together a heck of a performance. And if he can pull it off, I think it's going to be his best championship to date.
mm. It's nice seeing Verstappen again having to fight it. We loved the Verstappen we saw in 2021, having to have that full season scrap with Hamilton. And now we're seeing it sort of again with sort of McLaren, Norris, Leclerc coming back and making things tricky and making him have to sort of drive these technical and considered races. And ultimately, it's making the sport more exciting, but it's also making him more exciting as a driver to watch. And you sort of pick it apart and you find those interesting nuggets of performance that are doing wild and crazy things. And you go, oh, he's thought that through. That's really, he's becoming the thinking man's driver, if I dare throw that phrase his
It's a
way.
little bit like whenever you see it with, or you saw it with Hamilton, Vettel, and Schumacher to an extent of, yes, of course they can dominate. Domination is straightforward, but when you've got it tricky and you don't have the car to, that's when you've got to do it. And you think back to Brazil in 2021. Yeah, he had the car for it, Hamilton, but he still had to go and bloody do the whole thing twice, and he did it, and went up against Max Verstappen and beat him. It's that kind of thing where, yeah, I didn't forget how to do all of this, and yes, I'm used to driving off into the sunset every other weekend, but if I'm in this kind of situation, Max has proved this before by winning races from P14, P10, wherever, even against now cars that are better than his, he can still do it and he can still do maximum damage limitation.
Yeah, it is really exciting to watch at the moment. On the flip side of that coin, though, Perez neither use nor ornament here, really, unable to rear gun for Max, not that he needs it, really, and ultimately found himself scrapping with Yuki for position at one point. Good from Verstappen, as we've already mentioned. Yeah, the car is currently far from perfect. They're really sort of backtracking to find the correct development path. They're hoping they get to it relatively close to the end of this season so they can just sort of dummy it out. I think Red Bull have potentially accepted they might not be winning this constructors, certainly with the way their driver pairing is going about it, but they're still in the fight for a driver's title.
Yeah, definitely for drivers, but I don't think constructors, because that, in my mind, is going the way of Ferrari, because they are not
Yes.
a million miles behind. And if they keep doing stuff like this, they kind of did what Piastri did and just, we're just going to mind our own business and have a quiet race. And we just happen to be in first and second because, oh dear, you two are just busy with yourselves. I'll just go and take those places from you. And don't you worry about them. We'll look after them. No, you can't have them back. We're going to keep them. And we got our
Yeah.
first Ferrari 1-2 in the US since 2006, for crying out loud. I love that Ferrari's coming back, but Jesus Christ, do we have to have such a big gap between stuff? It was Schumacher and Massa, for God's sake.
18 years. And
Ooh.
2006, was that the dodgy Indianapolis or was that 2005? Which
That
was
was
the one?
2005.
Five was the one with the weird tire situation. But
It was
yeah,
still
even then,
Barrichello, I think, in 2005.
yes, yeah, it was, yeah, ages ago. But yeah, absolutely fantastic weekend from Ferrari. And I think they came into this weekend as a bit of an outlier. People were looking at the pace and going, oh, it's a bit tricky to tell where they're going to be. And you look at where they were on the grid. I think they got lucky with that Russell spin in qualifying because it really sort of stopped the clocks early, which sort of held them at the far end, front end of the grid.
I don't think it would have stopped them, though.
I don't think it would have done. Ultimately, their race pace was just really competent. And equally, that battle just opened up the door for two level headed drivers just to make their way through, both of them in red race suits and red race
They, they,
cars.
they, they remind me of Lawson and Colapinto in a way, in terms of they've got nothing to lose and everything to gain from this. It's just much higher stakes.
Mm,
And with Martin Leclerc, he's really evolving as a driver now, fulfilling that potential that we always knew he had in him, but we obviously sometimes doubted. And he's driving like someone who could be world champion. He's not a million miles away. And if you only need Norris and Verstappen, and I thought it might happen here, didn't, but we've got five more chances. They only need to take each other out again once, and
five
for
more
Leclerc to
chances
be
and some
there,
sprints.
you know. Oh, exactly, and he's in with a shout of it, and superb drive by Sainz as well. Nice little battle between them, both in the sprint, which I quite enjoyed, and to kind of add the extra bit of icing to the cake, Sainz selling Norris an obvious dummy on the last lap of that particular sprint to steal P2 from him was just so smirk inducing, like 1980s JR Dallas style kind of mischievous smirk of, you genuinely fell for this? Come on. Do you want to
Yeah,
be world champion? Get out.
we've seen this incredible evolution of Sainz as a driver, and he's got that sort of racecraft, that ability to, when that opportunity is there and he knows he can pull it off with safety, he will send you that move, he'll sell you that gap, and you'll fall for it. And you think, oh, go for it. And then he just sends it. You're like, ooh, that was really quite impressive. And again,
It's sort of that, but also he's telling you what he's going to do, and then he does it, and you're like, how did he do this? He told you,
it's
pretty
sort of
much.
like the fight scenes from the Sherlock Holmes films, the sort of ones where you sort of
Yes,
get
the
Robert
slow
Downey's sort of
mo.
precognition of how the
Yeah,
fight
yeah.
goes. Science is almost doing that. It's almost sort of telegraphed, but there's nothing you can do to stop it, which is really quite great in its relentlessness. And
Feels like Norris is watching it in slow motion whilst he's doing it in full speed.
yeah,
And by the time he's got back to reality, he's like, oh.
Oh, that
Damn.
happened. Oh, I'm a place behind now. But yeah, I think Carlos's drive this weekend was really good. It was the perfect drive for a teammate, perfect drive for the team, and proof that having two cars in the fight really gives you better control of the battle. Pulled the undercut with Carlos. It was a bold move to pull it that early as well, especially as Red Bull just declined to respond.
But again, nothing to lose, everything to gain. And I like this from Ferrari. They're
Mm.
finally learning, it feels like, from yesteryear.
Yeah, they understand how the car works on its tires, how it sort of heats them
They're
through, how
understanding
it degrades
strategy.
them.
They
Yeah,
just understand how strategy works
yeah.
positively.
And knowing that you've got a driver that can also manage that. And Sainz made the tyres
Mm.
work for those stints. He made that strategy work and kept his competitive pace. He was sort of hunting down Leclerc at one point, really closed up to him, I think, before their tyres leveled out. Leclerc, meanwhile, was just on it all the way. Second time this year, he's won from a Norris pole race from P4 as well. He did that in Monza. And yeah, just made the tyres stretch from the off and opened up that gap. Overall, this does close them up to Red Bull and McLaren nicely too. So the Constructors' Championship heats up beautifully, and it's just a really well put together race and a balanced strategy from Ferrari that utilized clear and good communication with the drivers. We were never saying this about Ferrari, or haven't said that about Ferrari since the early noughties. Like good communication, a balanced strategy. It's been 2 decades since that has been bartered around as a phrase for the Scuderia. So we're getting into this new phase for them. That is truly exciting. We're heading to Monza next. No, not Monza. We're heading to
No, we're
Mexico
not.
next, which could bring out some different strengths and weaknesses of the different cars across the field. But it's important to
I have a
remember
theory about
that
that for the Mexican Grand Prix preview.
but it's important to remember how close the Mexico GP setup is to a Monza setup and quite how competitive the Ferraris were that weekend. So we'll see how it pans out, but obviously you've got to run different cooling and things as well. So we'll see what happens there. But overall, it's just one of those weekends where you go, oh, yes, sì, ragazzi.
Felt right.
Yeah. Meanwhile, at Mercedes, there's some good bits to pick out of an
It's a very
interesting
odd
weekend.
weekend. Their car just didn't seem to agree with COTA from the get-go in FP1.
Mm.
They both cars having trouble with it, both spinning in or having issues in the same parts of the track, same in qualifying, same in the race. It's kind of very curious, and it's not as Hamilton said, he doesn't spin just by himself. Something caused that, and they're scrambling to figure out what the hell that is because
I
they came with
think
the
it was a
brakes.
gust of wind.
You kind of hope it was a gust of wind, but it's just so many unfortunate gusts of wind because it kept hitting them all. Everyone
Mm.
except, well, just the Mercedes drivers, essentially, is what I'm saying there. Just getting any bit of the track, we're like, okay, we've got this bit sorted now, a little bit of wind gets them somewhere else. So, very frustrating, especially considering Hamilton had terrible qualifying. Obviously, started P17 when you had other penalties taken into consideration and applied, and he was up to P12 in less than 2 laps, and it's just the insane amount of Lewis Hamilton that's coming from Lewis Hamilton there. And it's a shame we couldn't have seen him in the full Grand Prix because I wonder where he would have ended up after all of that. I'm not necessarily thinking he would have got to the podium, but if he's making that kind of progress in 2 laps, and you're looking at Perez in a Red Bull, and you're looking at the drivers trying to get up there, you're like, that could have been very interesting. Russell, just a brilliant recovery. I mean, again, unfortunate, binned it in qualifying, technically wind there again, but getting up to P6, getting past Perez, who should have been ahead of him, considering where he started.
Yeah, on a weekend where the one stop proved to really be the strategy, somehow making that two stop work and doing it from way back in the field was a really, really impressive run. And I think George made the most of a tricky situation, sort of remedying a lot. I mean, Mercedes are in a bit of a no man's
There's a lot
land.
of drivers this weekend where it just comes across as these drivers don't have anything to lose and everything to gain by just going for it, which is also
Which,
what you want from F1 all the time.
yeah, drivers just giving it their all the time. But,
Mm,
it's yeah, it was just a good drive from George. Mercedes are in a no man's land at the moment. So again, they've really got
mm.
nothing to lose when it comes to their drivers, who are both also sort of stranded in a bit of a sort of gulf when it comes to points wise. I think they're sort of
Well, they're both
they're sort
eliminated from contention for the championship now. Not that it was
yes,
ever likely to
yeah.
be on, and they're not really threatened by anyone from behind as such. I mean, Perez is the closest one to them, but that's not going to happen. So,
Yeah, Russell is 17 points ahead of Perez, has been since just Azerbaijan,
Bahrain.
I think. It's sort of switched and swapped a bit as it's gone on. But yeah, Hamilton 177, Sainz ahead on 215. Sainz gamely clinging on to a title fight, I believe, at the moment. He's just about mathematically able to do
That'd
it.
be a hell of a turnaround. I don't see it happening, but that'd be
Check
quite
stats, check stats,
quite
check
impressive.
stats, check stats, post
Imagine that you win a world championship and you go to Williams because your team's kicked you.
Yeah, so yeah, Sainz is 139 points adrift, and there is 146 points left still to gain. So it's getting fine margins, but mathematically it is doable. It would require literally constant DNFs from Norris and Verstappen, but
You get those Tuscan Raiders out again.
yeah, either way, what we're seeing has proven to be a very interesting sort of finale to the series and season. And Mercedes are just sort of making the most of it, I think. Again, they've got nothing to lose. They can just start developing bits. Odd that they only had one set of upgrades. I think they're saving their money, focusing on starting to develop that 2026 car. So it's going to be
did
interesting
find
to
it
see what they do
awkward
next year.
in a slightly amusing way that following qualifying, Hamilton said, "I've got the upgrades on my car. I'll give them to George. He's in a better position for it." George says no, then has to start from pit lane, and then and then DNFs him. Like, you maybe should. I mean, he didn't need those upgrades in the end, but maybe you should have taken them.
It would have been interesting. I think Mercedes would have rather that as well, because then they'd have some data on what those upgrades do. But anyway, um, speaking of people that are sort of lost in the middle of nowhere, Aston Martin.
There was some amusement here, at least, mainly because of Alonso and Lawson, of all people, kind of having a bit of a ding dong. So I want them together for a charity race or a boxing match at some point in the future. That'd be quite funny.
I mean, Piastri
Especially
did
amusing to
suggest
see him getting the eyes out, getting the knives out for Lawson, and then Lawson just gliding past him in the Grand Prix and not much he could do about it. Kind of,
I mean, Piastri did suggest that instead of things being solved with penalties, things are solved in the paddock afterwards, like NASCAR. But he said that probably wouldn't go down too well, which I did like.
you can tell
Piastri,
he's such a Mark Webber boy, isn't he?
I just love the fact that he just loves to stir the pot, that kid. Anyway, but yeah, Lawson and Alonso, really fun battle. I mean, you've got to hand it to Liam Lawson. Comes back into the race, back into the season after a year on the sidelines, and just immediately sort of picks.
Good news. You're going to race in Austin. Oh, great. 2024. Oh,
Oh,
kind of
fine.
following immediately on
Yeah.
from the last one.
But yeah, just sort of immediately turns up, picks up a multiple world champion, goes, I'm going to have a multi-lap, weekend-long battle with you.
It's like he's gone into prison and thought, where's the biggest
Biggest
toughest
guy
guy
I can
find?
fight. Yeah, it's such a wild strategy, but it paid off. I mean, Lawson came out of this looking great. I mean, Alonso just shrugs it off, water off a duck's back at this point for the guy. Meanwhile, Lance Stroll now holds the record for the most race starts without a fastest lap, relieving Johnny Herbert of that uncomfortable title. So I'm sure Johnny Herbert is pleased. Not great for Lance Stroll, but serves him right for calling me fat in one of my dreams recently. I'm still bitter about that.
You can't tell.
No, it's the third time I mentioned it, but anyway. Yeah, just a bit of a bleh weekend for Aston Martin.
Bit of a blessed season because as we talk about Haas in a second, I'm going to put a couple of things into contrast for you, and you're probably going to be shocked because you've not thought about them. Because Haas, double points, bearing in mind, in the sprint, fantastic qualifying, points for Hulk in the Grand Prix as well, best finish at a home Grand Prix for Haas. And had it not been for Magnussen's car issue, forcing him to pit later on, I dare say he would have been in the points as well. And he very much seems like he's a driver that knows he's not coming back and is just going all out there. That great tussle he had with Colapinto was just so very, very nice to watch. And the bit that is going to essentially make it draw drop slightly is Haas P6 in the standings now, 38 points. Aston Martin P5 with 86 points. It's not going to happen. But the fact that they're that close and are potentially going to be closer than that before the end of the season is a bit staggering, especially when you look at last year. Haas were P10 by the end of the day with 12 points, and Aston Martin were P5 with 280. Look at that difference. And if you're Haas, you are laughing your socks off right now.
Yeah, 38 to 86. So what's that? 86 to 38 is 48 points to accrue, and there is what, 5 races left?
Yes.
So all Haas have got to do is just score 10 points every race weekend still to come, and Aston Martin still score nothing, which is also actually quite reasonable. So it's not.
It's kind of a little bit like some of these other things we've been talking about. It's not the most audacious thing we could be saying, and it's going to make some wild predictions quite hard to make in these last few races.
Yeah, it looks massive on the graph.
Like, imagine you get a Brazil situation with Haas, and somehow they manage to get a podium or even a win out of it, and Aston Martin have a shocker, you know?
I mean, I still maintain that we're going to have Kevin Magnussen bookending his Formula One career with podiums.
But
I
yes,
reckon, I reckon we'll see that, and that would also
imagine that's how they claimed it. He's on his
final
way
race of
out
the season.
with a P2, 1 point ahead of Aston Martin, and just go, I'll be off. Give me coat.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I am done. Goodbye. And that would be the end of Kev Magnussen, but it'd be a beautiful way for him to go out. I mean, we're learning a lot about Haas at the moment, and they are continually moving up. We love to see it. It's going to be easy to criticize them from now on, though, bear in mind, because any shortcomings they have are going to be against this furious midfield battle. We're going to see a lot more from them. They're going to be against other cars. So all of a sudden, when you see those little bits go a bit wrong, it's going to be easier to pick up on them. But at the same time, Magnussen's pace on those fresh tyres was incredible. Obviously, there is the rubber advantage caveat there. His first Q3 entry this season is lovely to see too. Also, they are still using last season's designer Ferrari engine, the Tipo 066 Type 10. Stake has the 6612, as does the Works Ferrari team. So they're a generation behind on engine. They don't have a sim rig. They are 1/10 the size of everyone else, and they are ploughing their way through the field, just going points, 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 points. The sprint
This is the
weekend
thing, though.
marks their third triple points finish.
I think this was reiterated in the Braun documentary that because they were such a small team, obviously, with the bounce back they were trying to do, that they had to watch every single penny that they were spending and making sure it was being utilized to the fullest potential it could be. And when you're a bigger team, especially like Aston Martin, when you've got Lawrence just throwing money at everything left, right, and centre and hoping it's going to solve a problem, instead of maybe being more focused about it, as you could potentially accuse them of being, then it's not too surprising that Haas, when you have the right people in charge, are then able to start putting something together.
Yeah, hang on. I'm just going through and counting up how many double points finishes Aston Martin have had because I don't think it's a great number.
I don't think it's going to be a lot.
2, uh, uh, 3. There we go. There's
Ooh,
one. 4.
crikey. It's 4,
Uh,
isn't it?
hang on. Yeah, it's 4. So they've only had one more than Haas at this point. So it's not going to take much for the American outfit to catch up to them. Really, I don't think.
Ooh.
We'll see how it pans out.
Don't say it too loudly. Haas Chapel cream himself.
Oh, Henry will be very excited. Anyway, moving just like sort of 2 or 3 points down from Haas to Minardi, and yeah, interesting weekend for them too.
Yeah. I mean, Lawson's storming out the gates in this Grand Prix, and that was with a 60-place grid penalty, which means did he technically make up 51 places in that Grand Prix?
According to my fantasy league, no, he did not. They did not
Only for
award
you,
him
that's
51 points.
unfortunate. Interestingly, Martin Brundle suggested that he's aiming for Perez's seat in 2025, not 26, which I quite liked and want to pick up on because if he keeps driving like he did in Austin after being out for a year and getting points straight away, bearing in mind you have to start back at turn 12, then I'm up for a Verstappen Lawson team up there. Yuki questioning how Lawson's ahead of him, going, it's just better than you pretty much all weekend. It felt like I don't have a better way of, or a nicer way of putting it. He just was. So that's how he's ahead of you, Yuki. Bit of a sloppy one from you, it felt like.
Yeah, as much as I love Yuki Tsunoda, I think seeing that Lawson performance is truly incredible. And again, it's that sort of nothing to sort of cling on to and
It, it
hold dear.
it is this awkward thing of Yuki, and maybe we'll see how this goes over the next 5 races if there's a big turnaround. But he expected Ricardo to challenge him, didn't as much as everyone kind of hoped he would. Maybe he got too comfortable. And he thinks, well, I've been in this team a long time. I know how it all works. I'm the number one driver here. I can do, or I'm kind of dictating as much as I can. So if Perez does fall away, it's silly in his mind to go for Ricardo. They're not going to go for Lawson. I am the obvious choice. And then Lawson comes along and goes, I have 6 races to do whatever the hell I can to not only just try and get a seat at RB for next year, but to try and get one at actual RB, the big
Mm.
boys. And I will put everything I've got into it. And I'll be damned if you can give me a 60-place grid penalty if you want. It's not going to stop me. And the fact that he got on the point straight away, very impressive.
Yeah, it's a really good drive from Lawson and probably properly lobbing it in against the big boys. And yeah, Lawson's strategy turned out to be the better one. He came through on it. And yeah, he was also, yeah, Yuki was ahead of Perez for a while, didn't make it an easy pass. Yeah, just so much all over the place, though.
Again, it felt very much Norris Verstappen battle, and then you forget about who's actually threatening you, which was Ferrari. It was sort of Yuki. I was like, I've got to beat Perez so I can get a seat, and then Lawson just
Yeah,
like,
sneaks
oh,
up on them. Yeah. Um, Important thing to note, though, from last on the grid, Liam Lawson this weekend scored as many points as Daniel Ricciardo did in his last 7 races, which is um, kind of
unnecessary
painful.
to mention.
Unnecessary to mention, possibly a little bit painful if you're a Daniel Ricciardo fan, but I think it makes
You
an
claim to
interesting
be, but
point.
I'm beginning to think that you're just a cold-hearted bastard.
I,
There, I said it.
when it comes to
Lance
certain
Stroll was right
aspects,
to call you what he called you.
he called me fat.
There,
That was
I
nothing to
said
do with him being
it.
cold-hearted. He just called me fat, which is somewhat more hurtful. I'm not cold. I'm cold-hearted. I'm cynical when it comes to Daniel Ricciardo, but I'm not fat. At least I don't think I'm fat. Anyway, Williams are next on the constructors' order, and another interesting weekend from them.
Sublime work from Colapinto. Give him that Audi seat because neither of those drivers of that team deserve it. Albon a bit out balanced, but fighting hard, and I like to see that. He'll bounce back. He'll be fine. But Colapinto just. It's a shame he couldn't have had that fastest lap at the end, Danny Ocon. But the fact that he had it in the first place and they had to deal with him, considering Alpine, what they had, which we'll get to in a minute, mad. And just kind of, if you're Williams, you're James Bowers, you're just rubbing your palms together going, this is well, it's a bloody treat.
When was the last time that Williams would have had a fastest lap point? That's the real question.
I want to say like Spa 2021 with Russell in the wet or something where it was that non-race. But if it's not then I'm not sure.
Or the one where he somehow ended up on the podium. No, weirdly, that race actually nearly gave it to
With Lance Stroll.
Nikita Mazepin because he was the last person across, so he was able to hang back and then charge through and somehow get it. Let me check notes, check the big. I'm back into the 2010s, still not seeing it.
I mean, Pastor Maldonado didn't get it.
Here we go. Here we go. Valtteri Bottas, 2014 at the Russian Grand Prix. He finished 3rd and with the fastest lap. There you are. That was the last time. That was the last time that Williams scored a fastest lap. So it's been a long time coming, and yeah, Colapinto.
We've got
really,
5 more races to do it.
If the way Colapinto's driving, I think it's going to happen. He's proven to be a valuable driver, and until Alpine pitted for softs on Ocon, it was that fastest lap. And yeah, did you see Colapinto's comment in the media pool as well, saying, I don't know why Alpine did that. They're supposed to be saving the planet, and here's them blowing through tyres. But obviously, he said that forgetting that Ocon can speak Spanish, and Ocon was stood behind him at this moment in time. So obviously, completely understood what he was saying. There's a great shot of Ocon with some incredible side eye going, what? Ocon did also apologise to Franco on social media.
Just going to echo Piastri here. Just sort it out.
Sort it out, yeah. Boxing gloves in the media pen. We televised that bit as well.
No, bare knuckles.
Whoa. Anyway, it's still a long way to go for that car, and I think it really depends on the circuit. It means it's just going to pinball between Franco and Alex towards the end of the season, but that gung-ho nature of Franco's is proving to be a rewarding one, and yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what they put together.
Verstappen being Colapinto's second in that fight. What comes there?
Just sort of sitting there in the corner going, come on, do it. Anyway, we get down to the bottom end of the field, and speaking of Ocon and, of course, Alpine,
I mean, after the preview, we hadn't seen their car in daylight yet because it had bloody light on it the whole time. Which, yes, I get why because Indiana Jones, but it did actually look all right in the end of the car. So I'm happy the livery worked out for a change in terms of we've put some random paint job on the car and I actually like it. In terms of the Grand Prix, big opportunity. Gasly qualified P6, and then they just went, nah. How about we don't? Let's just don't. And they didn't.
Yeah,
They
it
just
just
fumbled it. And yeah,
a car that just
shouldn't have gone
didn't
onto the hard
work.
tyres at that point. Got into traffic. Had to try and deal with Kevin Magnussen because Magnussen's a threat to you. I mean, no offense to Magnussen, but it's kind of mad that of the two Haas drivers, you're having to deal with the second one as your biggest threat because you can't even get him in near Hull when you're supposed to be Renault, essentially. And just made me think this is potentially your last opportunity this season because you can never know when you're a team this far down the order when you're going to get a chance like this next to really capitalize on some points. And they just buggered it.
Yeah, it was not the result I think that anyone really wanted from the French outfit. And yeah, playing the game, pitting Ocon to take fastest lap away from their championship rivals at Williams. They're only 4 points shy of the Grove outfit, so a further point is still a big aspect. And the car looked pacey at points. It looked really good in qualifying at moments, but it is hugely dependent on its tire compound. And yeah, while Gasly had some new elements this weekend as well, Ocon is still running a floor from China, so that is interesting to see what's going on in the factory there. But yeah, Ocon's first ever fastest lap. There is at least something to celebrate as an Alpine fan this weekend. So many happy returns to him on this monumentous occasion. That is it for Alpine. Might have even less to say for Stake.
I wrote down separately, yes, please, in terms of I'd like a steak.
I've not long had dinner. I think I'll pass. Maybe tomorrow night or something.
In terms of during the race, just thinking play a bit of Kylie.
Yeah,
Seemed appropriate.
spin me right round. Or Dead or
Yeah,
Alive,
that's all
depending
I've
on
got.
your
That's
choice
all
of
I've got
music.
for Joe and the rest of them because what else is there to say? It's like,
Yeah.
hey, we're finally seeing steak on the TV. Oh, never mind. It's just
Oh,
because he's by
yeah.
himself.
It was an odd spin on his own, and Bottas had zero pace as well. So just fairly terrible weekend.
Pontus
Bottas
has
is
had
now,
zero pace for the last 2 years.
yeah, but he's now also 23rd in a 20 driver championship. So congratulations to him.
Welcome back, Nicholas Latifi.
Yeah, where had you been? Um, so yeah, that rounds out the.
Pull the mask off. Like, I knew it was you
That'd be a bit of a shock to Tiffany Cromwell, I'm sure. Um, but anyway, that rounds out our review of the racing action. We'll jump into our winners and spinners because I feel this may offer some further insight. And Thiemo will start with yours, which I think is obvious.
I say not too much further insight from me on this one because it's Lawson Colapinto. They just, like I said, they are driving with nothing to lose and everything to gain, and they gained everything they possibly could given their current circumstances. And I hope we get to see them both on the grid next year, but not with the teams that they're currently with.
Yeah, it's two fantastic drivers that have just sort of materialized out of nowhere at this point in the season. I don't think anyone really expected them to come in. Maybe Lawson at some point. There's always been that rumor of Red Bull
It,
swapping people, but Colapinto was really a shot out of the blue and is still proving to be very refreshing.
it feels to me a little bit like Leclerc when he was without Romeo, in terms of I'd like to see him in a bigger team because there's something about these two. And I hope they're in F1 for a long time if they continue like this, and I hope that they can battle each other and many more aside from that.
They're very exciting drivers to watch on track. My winner is a slightly more obvious one. It's me. They've had a great weekend. It's Ferrari. It's just a really, really competent weekend and the first Ferrari 1-2 since, I want to say Bahrain a
It's
few
the
years ago.
sixth this decade. I just can't remember where the last one was.
Let's check.
Giving you a year eight maths question. If it's their sixth this decade, when was the last time they scored a 1-2?
Uh, Scuderia Ferrari and Ferrari Grand Prix results. Let's go through that. What's all that? That's non-championship, probably into bits. Okay, their last 1-2 would have been. Yeah, I was right. It was Bahrain, but 2022.
I've
which
not
was
yet got that far back in my mind.
the double Red Bull retirement,
Yes,
which
yes,
was
beautiful
strange
days.
scenarios. Yeah. And their last one before that was
Earlier.
it would have been Singapore 2019. Vettel wins, Leclerc second, which was interesting times as well. But there we go. Yeah, Ferrari just having a grand old time, and I'm enjoying it. Meanwhile, flip side of the coin, spinners.
Alpine, as mentioned, they and I apologise for doing this, but I also have to because it's not going to happen very often. They had an opportunity to raid the Lost Ark of points in what might have been one of their last crusades to do so, but instead they trapped themselves in a bit of a Temple of Doom.
Um,
It wasn't worth
shame-
trying to think of things for the other two, so I stuck with the original trilogy.
yeah, no, fair
You
enough.
don't want to force these things.
Yeah, that's fair. Much like the fourth and fifth Indiana Jones films, you don't really want to force them. Just a shame that no one had a Kingdom of the Crystal Skull helmet. That would have been
See,
quite
this
fun.
is what I'm saying. It doesn't work.
Yeah, it's clunky, a bit like the Alpine. Meanwhile, my spinner Lewis Hamilton, A, quite literally span, and B, this is just not the weekend. Did not get his quali run right. Shouldn't have been that far down the grid. Just wrong place, wrong time, not having a grand old time of things, and certainly one of them, I think, the most dominant driver at the Circuit of the Americas, and this is his final race there for Mercedes. So,
And it's the first American race period that he's just not finished. And bearing in mind, he raced at Indianapolis.
yeah, he would have done. He would have been one of the few drivers on the grid to have raced Indianapolis. Him and Alonso,
Mhm.
Perez,
Yeah,
maybe.
and he's no, not Indianapolis.
No. Wow.
But they're the only two who've raced at every single COTA
Yes.
Grand Prix. But in terms of every single American Grand Prix that we've had for donkey's years
Yeah, that
since
is
he started,
impressive. What year would he have raced at?
2006, I think,
2007 was when he
6 or 7,
started.
yeah.
USA was still at Indianapolis. Yeah, and that was the last time he raced in America. Wow. What a career, and what a bum way for it to end with Mercedes. Anyway, move away from winners and spinners to our predictions. And well, it's points across the board this weekend. Quite a high scoring weekend for us. A point to Ellie-May for her pole position. And then it's a point to Thiemo and I for a Leclerc win. And annoyingly,
Which I have an interesting thing here because I have Mercedes merch, I have Ferrari merch. When I wear Mercedes merch, Ferrari win. When I wear Ferrari merch, oh, sorry, whichever way around I just said it, the opposite way, the other team wins. And I'm trying to figure out what to do with this.
yeah, get merch from someone else. Expand
I
the
have
experiment.
McLaren merch, but it's from 2012,
Bit
so I don't know how that
tenuous.
would impact them.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, all the teams are saying just buy more merch. Buy the £200 Levi's McLaren stuff. That'll set you right. It's good looking stuff, but Jesus, it's expensive. Anyway, podiums. It's a point to Thiemo and I for the Leclerc win. Annoyingly, I had Sainz on the podium, but a step below his reality position, which is what Ellie-May scored a point for as well. No one got the fastest lap prediction right because nobody thought it was going to be Esteban Ocon.
No, I still don't think it was going to be Esteban.
I mean, this is the sort of thing that you usually predict is some absolutely wild scenario for a fastest lap, but maybe by now, yeah. And wild prediction, Ellie-May for Haas double points in the sprint race of all places. I will allow it. Yeah, 3 double point finishes for Haas this season. It's becoming less and less of a wild prediction. So given that Charles and Lando have won 3 races apiece, I'd argue it's a sign of growth from Haas that we can no longer call a doubles points finish from them wild. So from moving forwards, we'll no longer be accepting a double points finish from Haas as wild. Anyway, next up is our F1 fantasy review. And for the Austin Grand Prix weekend, I came out on top, 412 points for JB Racing. Let's go. Leclerc on the triple and Sainz on the double. Beautiful stuff. Doors by Gunther Steiner in second place, 364 points. And Ellie-May's podcast team with the reverse of the 2 Ferrari drivers, as well as Ferrari as a constructor, really banging in some points there. So obviously Sainz on the triple, Leclerc on the double. Not too bad. Jaffa Cake Racing P5, Extra Magnifico Terrestrial P6, on the Cubs P12. Your podcast team, Thiemo P19. Very ballsy of you to put Russell on the 2 times points there. But obviously, you want a point for every overtake they do from their starting position to their finishing position.
Yeah,
So
but if you look at qualifying and you think
yeah,
how you're not, and then pit lane start, and you're thinking, yeah, I'd love him to get up to the top five or so, but you're not necessarily expecting him to do so.
I mean, it paid off for you in the end. Meanwhile, Lada Formula One team very much living up to the name in P37. Overall,
Ricardo is still present there.
that would be why. Overall, Taker Stroll still leads 4,146 points. Doors by Gunther Steiner, 4,135 points. And what's the Racing Point? 4,111 points. On the Kerbs in P11, JB Racing P12, not that far behind you. I'm fighting it back. Ellie-May's podcast.
Yeah, but enjoy
team.
Austin while you can, because I reckon you can only do that kind of a thing once.
Yeah, but at least
You're gonna
I
have
did
to
it.
rely on how you've been doing the rest of the year now, and
Not great. Ellie-May's podcast team P19, the greatest moustache, trailing in P37. I mean, that's all we've got time for this week's episode. We've really rattled through that one, a fair bit to go over, and we've done it inside the hour. So, Thiemo,
just about.
if people have still got some time free, where can they find you?
Mainly on other podcasts this week. I don't know if I mentioned at all recently, but I've recently recorded a review of the IndyCar 2024 season, and that's coming out this week. So you can go and give that a listen. That'll be on Spotify and everywhere else. And if you want a bit of different action, where overtaking and ballsy overtaking is not only applauded but encouraged, especially if you've got a bit of door bashing, there's a brand new episode of the Nitro Cross podcast where we're reviewing all the action from the latest 2 rounds in Salt Lake City with some very lovely gap jumps.
Beautiful stuff indeed. In the meantime, if you want more from me, you can find me writing for Classic Car Weekly. I'm all over the place with that, writing, busy, lots of events and stuff still to go. And of course, I'm on social media as @JesseOnCars on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And more these days, back in the workshop fixing my MG because it is, again, broken. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again soon for a preview of the Mexican Grand Prix.